Hello and welcome back. Today we are looking at more inmates murdered in prison, so let's head straight into the cases, starting with John Smith. On the 27th of March 2019, John Smith was remanded to Hull Prison for breaching a criminal behaviour order. It was his first time in prison. He was released from prison 2 months later, but the next day he was found with a knife and was remanded to Birmingham Prison. John Smith's person escort record, his PER, noted his history of substance misuse and self-harm. It noted that he was at risk of taking his own life and needed to be monitored. It also noted that he had learning difficulties and depression. He arrived at Brinsford on the evening of the 24th of November. His PER warned that he could be violent, had committed a racially aggravated offence in the past, and was under the care of the mental health team. The lady who he saw for his substance misuse team said that he attended counselling. She said that he talked about his trauma, his drug addiction and the impact that it had on his family. He wanted to be free from drugs before he was released from prison and didn't want to cause his family any more pain. She said he did not say anything about feeling at risk from any other prisoners. The lead from the substance misuse team said that Mr. Smith left the session in a positive frame of mind. Mr. Smith lived on G-Wing, and Abdi Rimna Essa, who was 21 years old, lived in the cell opposite. Staff had raised no concerns about either of them, or that they had any issues with each other. On the 4th of December, staff noted that Mr. Smith took part in exercise, collected his lunch and received the items he had ordered from the prison shop. CCTV footage shows that prisoners returned to the G2 landing after their exercise. 2 officers were with the prisoners and talked to them. An officer spoke briefly to Mr. Smith. He said Mr. Smith had told him that his mother was going to buy him some clothes for Christmas and planned to bring them on the next visit to see him. The officer told Mr. Smith that he would get him the forms he needed for this. On the G2 landing, prisoners were talking among themselves, and a few stood outside their cell doors, waiting for prison officers to unlock their doors. At just before 2:56 p.m, CCTV footage shows that prisoner Abdi Essa, who was 21, walked up behind Mr. Smith and punched him at the back or side of his head. Mr. Smith did not know that the prisoner was behind him. The force of the punch pushed Mr. Smith's head into his cell door before he collapsed to the ground, possibly hitting his head again on the floor. An officer quickly put prisoner Abdi Essa into his cell. The officer rushed to Mr. Smith's side. He was still unconscious and failed to respond to his name. An officer immediately pressed the general alarm button on the wall. CCTV shows that 2 nurses equipped with medical emergency equipment arrived to treat him at 3 p.m. He was beginning to rouse when the nurses arrived. His first words were, "It really hurts." The nurse said Mr. Smith appeared vacant but not dazed or drowsy. A nurse and her colleague completed a full range of medical observations and she was satisfied that Mr. Smith showed no immediate neurological red flags. The nurses helped him stand up and he appeared to have no other injuries. He was coherent, talking and displayed no confusion. Based on this examination, the nurses decided to stand down the ambulance as it appeared that Mr. Smith had had a slight knock to the back of his head. The control room recorded that the ambulance was cancelled at 3:05 p.m. The nurse then decided she wanted to complete a fuller examination of his injury. She decided to do so in the healthcare unit. She intended to view the CCTV footage of the incident to understand what had happened. The nurses encouraged Smith to make the 10-minute walk to the healthcare unit. He continued speaking throughout. He said he did not want to leave the wing and appeared more concerned about the location of his vape. CCTV footage shows that Mr. Smith initially struggled to walk, even with staff support. A nurse told us that a wheelchair was available, but Mr. Smith refused to use it. After the medical check, the nurse realised that the incident was more serious than initially thought, and asked for an ambulance to be called again due to the nature of the head injury and suspected illicit drug use. The paramedics decided to transfer him to hospital for further assessment. Abdi Essa was moved to the segregation unit. The prisoner was asked why he assaulted Smith. The prisoner said that someone had been banging on the windows or doors the night before, and Mr. Smith had thought that it was him. He said Mr. Smith made a racist remark towards him. Abdi said he told Mr. Smith, "You can't be saying racist things like that in here." They reported that he had a cardiac arrest when he arrived at hospital. Smith remained in a critical condition. At 6:30 a.m, the hospital consultant told the prison that Smith would not survive and they would soon need to switch off his life support. On the 15th of December, Abdir was charged with manslaughter. He was convicted on the 21st of April 2021. He received an extended sentence of 37 months. The judge concluded there was no evidence that Mr. Smith was racist towards the prisoner. The clinical reviewer was satisfied that the care that Mr. Smith received in prison, including the emergency response, was equivalent to which he could have accepted in the community. In March 2014, Madala Washington was convicted of serious drug offences. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison, and in October 2015 was sent to Coldingley Prison. Intelligence information suggested that Washington was involved in criminal activity in prison. On the 25th of March 2016, Washington was told he could not attend Friday prayers as intelligence suggested he might be involved in an incident with other prisoners, yet on the 1st of April he was allowed to attend. On the way, Washington was involved in an altercation with another prisoner. Mr. Washington punched the other prisoner, which resulted in the two men fighting. Staff separated Washington and the other prisoner, and soon afterwards Washington collapsed. Staff assisted and soon established that he had been attacked with a weapon. Staff and paramedics tried to help him, but he passed away of his injuries. Accounts which surfaced after Washington's death said that in the weeks before, Mr. Washington and the other prisoner were in a dispute after Washington failed to return a mobile phone that he had lent to him. The other prisoner was charged with the murder, but was found not guilty. The perpetrator remains unknown. The prison's decision to allow Washington to attend on the 1st of April was reasonable, given that there was no intelligence available identifying that Washington was at risk from other prisoners on that day. The review said staff could not reasonably have anticipated what happened that day. Nevertheless, the prison's local policy on searching is not sufficiently robust or clear, and staff do not always search prisoners at random before they move from one area of the prison to another. Brett Rogers had a history of violent behaviour, attempting to take his own life and self-harm, mental illness, and admissions to secure mental health units. On the 27th of January 2017, he transferred to Long Lartin Prison and was held on the healthcare centre for assessment because he was not taking his antipsychotic medication. Rogers became compliant with his medication in early February and his behaviour steadily improved. He completed a phased move to Perry Blue, a small unit of 42 cells, and moved there permanently on the 7th of March. Rogers appeared settled on the Perry Blue, mixed with the other prisoners, and was given a job as a wing cleaner. Brett, who was 25, was jailed in 2016 for taking the life of his mother and her friend in Essex. Gary Linley had been in Perry Blue since February 2017. He had a history of mental illness, substance misuse, attempting to take his own life, methadone dependency, social anxiety disorder and PTSD. He was not regarded as a risk to other prisoners. He became friends with Rogers and appeared to look after him and advocate for him. Prisoner B, who was named as Billy White, had a history of ADHD, polysubstance misuse, PTSD, psychosis, and emotionally unstable and antisocial personality disorders. In December 2016, he was assessed as possessing the traits of psychopathy. His personality disorder meant that he was a risk to staff and prisoners. Billy White had been kept in segregation unit for 2 months when he first arrived at Long Lartin. He was moved to Perry Blue Wing in December 2016. His risk was reassessed in February 2017 after he punched another prisoner, but he appeared to settle in Perry Blue without further problems. The record showed no significant contact between White and Rogers, but he gradually became friendlier with Gary Linley. On the 7th of June 2017, Rogers did not go down for his evening medication. An officer discovered him unresponsive in his cell. A code blue emergency and an ambulance were called and staff and nurses tried to save his life. They stopped when they realised that he had already passed away. Mr. Rogers had no obvious injuries, but CCTV showed that Gary Linley and Billy White had gone into his cell. At court, it was heard Billy White and Gary Linley prayed after they took the life of Rogers. The pair, who admitted murder at a previous hearing, believed their actions would exorcise a demon from Rogers and cleanse him of his crimes. White was given a whole life tariff for taking his life. He was already serving a life sentence for the 2015 murder of his partner. Linley was serving an indeterminate sentence after he was jailed at Nottingham Crown Court in 2007 for his part in a violent distraction robbery. Linley will serve at least 17 years of a life sentence for taking the life of Rogers. The judge said White and Linley planned Rogers' death about a week before attacking him. Luke Derriman was remanded to Hull Prison on the 8th of January 2018. He had a history of substance misuse, attempting to take his own life, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and violent tendency disorder. James Johnson, who had been a prisoner at Hull since September 2017, he also had a history of mental illness, substance misuse, self-harm, and violence. James Johnson was identified as a risk to others, and an entry on his medical record on the 16th of October 2017 noted that his risk of harm to others increased when he was under the influence of psychoactive substances. On the 18th of January 2018, he admitted he was using PS daily and asked for help. He declined to speak to a mental health nurse later that day, and a planned appointment had not taken place before the crime. At 3:20 p.m. on the 23rd of January, prisoners alerted staff that Mr. Derriman was not breathing. Officers and nurses started to try and save his life, but he passed away shortly after arriving at hospital at 5 p.m. A pathologist found that he had passed away from basal subarachnoid hemorrhage as a result of a punch to his head. CCTV showed James Johnson had thrown a punch to him at 3:03 p.m. and he was charged with manslaughter. At his trial, James Johnson said that he punched him in self-defense. He was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Samuel Harrison was sentenced to 2 years in prison for robbery and sent to Lincoln Prison. He was moved to North Sea Camp on the 8th of June before returning to Lincoln on the 20th of July. On the 12th of August, Harrison told an officer that he was being bullied for his canteen, his order from the prison shop. The officer recorded that she had reported this to a supervising officer, but no further action was taken. On 3 occasions in August, Mr. Harrison was suspected of being under the influence of psychoactive substances. On the 25th of August, he was moved to Her Majesty's Prison, Humber, to give him a fresh start away from the drug culture at Lincoln. However, he was returned to Lincoln on the 1st of September after a court appearance. On the 11th of September, prisoners alerted staff that Harrison had collapsed in the shower. Initially, both prisoners and officers thought Harrison was under the influence of PS, but when nurses attended, they realised he had sustained a significant head injury, and some prisoners told staff he had been assaulted. He was taken to hospital where he had brain surgery and was placed in an induced coma. He never regained consciousness and passed away on the 25th of September. Another prisoner was charged with Harrison's manslaughter. He admitted to punching Harrison but said this was in self-defense. This was accepted by the jury in his criminal trial, but he was found not guilty. In the report, there was no intelligence to indicate that the prisoner who punched Harrison posed a risk to other prisoners. There was also no intelligence linking him and Mr. Harrison. Liam Deane had been at Leeds Prison since the 13th of August 2017 and was serving a life sentence for taking the life of his 2-day-old daughter. John Westland, who was 29, was serving a sentence for R and GBH, had been at Leeds since March 2017 after transferring from Hull Prison and was serving a sentence for S offences. He had previously displayed poor behaviour and had been found under the influence of illicit substances in prison. In August 2017, John Westland had been attacked by a previous cellmate at Leeds who had thrown boiling water in his face. Deane and Westland started sharing a cell in the vulnerable prisoner wing on the 19th of October 2017. Cell sharing risk assessments were completed appropriately for both men. There was no information that indicated either Deane or Westland were at risk to other prisoners. At 5:30 a.m. on the 12th of November, the emergency cell bell was pressed in the cell occupied by Deane and Westland. An operational support grade responded. When the OSG reached the cell, John Westland told him that he thought Deane had taken his own life. The OSG used the radio to call a medical emergency code to summon help. Healthcare staff responded immediately. They examined Deane and agreed that the attempts were not going to happen, as he had passed away. On the 2nd of August 2018, John Westland was found guilty of the murder of Deane. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 19 years. The reason he gave for his attack on Deane was that Deane was an S offender. The judge said that it was impossible to know whether he had taken the life of Deane for his own satisfaction or to curry favour with others, or because others had encouraged him to do so. In 2006, Sidonio Texeira was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder and moved to Long Lartin Prison in 2009. He admitted to taking the life of his 3-year-old daughter and trying to take the life of his 9-year-old son in 2007. Victor Castigador was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life tariff in 1996 for taking the life of 2 security guards and transferred to Long Lartin Prison for a second time in 2013. Castigador had a history of assaulting and threatening prisoners, and staff submitted a number of security intelligence reports about his behaviour during his time in prison. Mr. Texeira was a quiet man who did not mix with other prisoners. He often complained about other prisoners' behaviour and sometimes passed information about them to staff, so other prisoners perceived him as an informer or a rat. Mr. Texeira was a vulnerable prisoner because of his offence and lived on A Wing, one of the vulnerable prisoner units. Castigador applied for vulnerable prisoner status because of problems on a standard wing and moved to B Wing, another VPU. He moved to A Wing between December 2015 and January 2016, and there were no reported problems between him and Texeira. On Wednesday, the 15th of June, Texeira and Castigador exchanged words in the workshop. The next day, a prisoner told a member of the workshop staff that he was going to take the life of Texeira. The staff member submitted a low-priority security intelligence form to the security department, explaining what he had said. On Friday the 17th of June and Saturday the 18th of June, he repeated the same threats to an officer. The officer also submitted a low-priority security intelligence form talking about what Castigador had said. No one from the security department reviewed the 2 reports until Sunday the 19th of June, and no specific action was taken in response to the information. On the morning of Monday the 20th of June, Castigador and Mr. Texeira went to the workshop. While prisoners were changing into their work boots, Castigador hit Texeira around the head with a rock he had hidden in his socks. Staff intervened and radioed a medical emergency. Texeira was severely injured. Paramedics arrived and moved Texeira to an ambulance for further treatment. He passed away in the ambulance. In October 2016, Castigador was sentenced to life imprisonment. He hid a rock inside a sock before using it. After the murder, he said he was a wet dog and vowing to murder that B-word. After the death, he told the guards, "He peed me off, he deserved what he had." He then bragged, "I'm never getting out, I have nothing to lose, he won't need an ambulance, he's already dead." On the 15th of October 2015, John Coxall arrived at Nottingham Prison after receiving a 6-month sentence for breaching a restraining order. Coxall occupied a single cell on B Wing, a general population wing. Coxall had been in Nottingham before. He settled in well and interacted appropriately with other prisoners and staff. He used a walking stick. On the 20th of November, Coxall was admitted to hospital with breathing difficulties, and on the 23rd of November he was discharged from hospital. He returned to live on B Wing. David Gomezor in 2009 was remanded in custody and charged with blackmail and threats to kill. In 2011 he was convicted and received a 5-year custodial sentence. He had a history of drug abuse and a prolific history of harming himself. He had been admitted to secure units on several occasions under the Mental Health Act for treatment of emotionally unstable personality disorder. The last admission had been on the 21st of May 2015 when he transferred from Nottingham Prison to Arnold Lodge, a medium-level secure psychiatric hospital. On the 15th of September, Coxall returned to Nottingham. Staff at Arnold Lodge assessed him as being at medium risk of self-harm, but at low risk of harm to others. On arrival at Nottingham, he was immediately placed on a prevention measures wing and occupied a cell on G Wing, a wing he had lived on before. G Wing is a vulnerable prisoner wing, where a third of the prisoners are aged over 60. On the 27th of October, he told staff he was under threat and wanted to move off G Wing. On the 6th of November, he moved to a single cell. On the afternoon of the 3rd of December, during the association period, without warning, he took the life of Mr. Coxall. He was convicted of Coxall's murder on the 27th of May 2016. At court it was heard Coxall had been due to see a mental health nurse on the day of the crime, but failed to attend. In a transcript of his police interview played to the jury, he said to the officers, "The voices told him to do it. He looked like Santa. How can you kill Santa, man?" He said he thought he heard voices telling him to kill when he attacked Coxall. In 2007, Darren Flynn received a sentence for wounding with intent. He had a history of substance misuse, self-harm and violence to others in prison, including staff. Flynn had been at Swellside since October 2014, and in January 2015 he was moved to the Pathways unit at the prison. This unit is designed to support and prepare high-risk offenders with emotional, relationship and behavioural difficulties to progress in the prison system. Paul Wadkin received a life sentence for murder in 2001. During his time in prison, he had assaulted other prisoners, and there was intelligence about him threatening staff and prisoners, as well as allegations that he had planned to take the life of 3 other prisoners. In January 2015, he was transferred to Swellside. He joined the Pathways unit in February. Jason Gomez, who was 45, was already serving life for murder, admitted the charge before the trial. In 2011, he received a sentence for GBH. During his time in prison, he had assaulted another prisoner, and there was intelligence that he had threatened and assaulted staff, had weapons, threatened to take a hostage, and threatened to kill another prisoner. In November 2014, he was transferred to Swellside. At the end of February 2015, he was accepted on the Pathways programme and moved to the Pathways unit. Flynn settled in well, attended engagement groups and interacted appropriately with other prisoners. On the morning of the 25th of March 2015, Jason Gomez and Flynn took part in a group therapy session. Flynn left for a while. He said he had been upset when the group discussed ex-offenders. Gomez told the group that he was annoyed that Flynn had looked at him as if to accuse him of being an ex-offender. That evening, Paul Wadkins and Gomez went into the cell. They used weapons and took his life. Flynn, who walked with a crutch, was held down during the attack. Before he passed away, he was branded a grass and a dead man walking by Gomez. They were arrested, and the court also heard Wadkin had told a police officer, "Just murdered a nonce." Prosecutor Philip Bennett said the body was found in bed in Wadkin's cell and had been covered with bedding and a chair. Wadkin grinned as he was led to the cells following a verdict by the jury of guilty. Jason Gomez was already serving life for murder and will never be released after a judge imposed a whole life sentence. Paul Wadkin, who was serving a sentence for wounding, will be behind bars for a minimum of 30 years before he will be considered for release. And that concludes our video today. As always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.